something loud. Microphones, stages, crowds. But the power that shaped me didn't come from volume. It came from places where most people didn't look. Places you're taught to avoid. Places you pass through quickly. I found power in immigrant neighborhoods, immigrant communities, and places full of life but rarely acknowledged. I'll never forget singing in the middle of a street in the Tenderloin district in San Francisco. Beside me was a plastic Christmas tree, and surrounding me were children and neighbors of all ages, some with missing teeth, and many facing hardships that most people will never see. Cars passed slowly, unsure of what they were witnessing. People poked their heads out of their apartment windows, and for a moment, the street paused. They listened, they sang along, and despite having performed for over 12 years in theaters, auditoriums, and even stadiums, this street by far was one of the most meaningful audiences I've ever had. If you know anything about the Tenderloin, you know it's a place that most people don't casually wander into. You see people sleeping on the street, you smell the scent of cigarettes, you see drug pens on the floor, but most people don't know that Little Saigon is located in the heart of the Tenderloin. Behind all the headlines are immigrant communities, a neighborhood made by refugees, war survivors, and first-generation families trying to build their lives for themselves. When my grandmother and immigrants like her first arrived in San Francisco, they didn't choose places based on comfort or reputation. They chose places they could afford. That's how communities like Little Saigon were formed, not out of convenience, but it was out of necessity and survival. I grew up walking these streets every single weekend. I saw the warmth, the language, the food, the familiarity, but I also saw its struggles. Drugs, violence, businesses closing one by one. It was a neighborhood carrying the weight of neglect. To others, it seemed ghetto, but to me, it was home. Many people expect immigrants to be quiet, invisible, and grateful. We're prided for being able to survive and adapt, but we're rarely acknowledged for making our communities and cities. Our labor is visible, but our history is not. That Christmas caroling made me ask a crucial question I couldn't shake. If this community was so full of life, then why was its story unheard? That question drove me to action. I joined neighborhood cleanups, promoted local businesses, and I sang at community events, not because it was glamorous, but because presence mattered. People told me to stay away. They told me it was dangerous, but they assumed danger without knowing its people. They assumed risk without knowing its roots. It made me ask a question. If not me, then who? Because silence has never benefited communities like mine. I was eventually entrusted to host the 50th anniversary of San Francisco's Little Saigon. This trust didn't come out of nowhere. It came from years of showing up, helping up, setting chairs, translating when needed, and listening more than speaking. I was nervous, I was scared, and I was young because the responsibility was real. I felt the weight of representing the people that have been ignored for decades. This was more than just a community event. It was an opportunity for the community, my community, to be heard. I coordinated logistics, I worked with security, and I gathered over 100 volunteers in order to go to this event. Designers from Vietnam, Canada, and Los Angeles all sent in their Aoyai collections in order for the community to see. Models, dancers, singers, performers, all of them came to the event not because of money, but because of pride. On December 13th, 2025, as I stood on stage, watching hundreds of people gathering around, many people with different backgrounds, and many of whom had never experienced a professional program on Larkin Street before. I saw business members collaborating with small events. I saw news reporters interviewing elders whose story had never been reviewed before. I saw collaborations happening that weren't happening the night before. These were the same streets that people once told me to fear, but this day wasn't about fear. It was about unity. This is what unheard power looks like to me. It's the power of immigrant communities coming together. Even if they weren't ever supposed to take center stage, they made entire neighborhoods anyway. It's the strength and the resilience of people coming together and ignoring the herd because the herd never made place for them in the first place. Being unheard doesn't mean you're powerless. Sometimes it means your power hasn't been discovered. My grandma's generation, in order to survive, they had to stay silent. But my generation has the opportunity and the responsibility to speak up, because not only do we have to reclaim our stories, but we have to generate and change our community for the better. So, my question to you is this. Who have you learned to overlook when you think about power? Because sometimes power doesn't come on a stage and a spotlight. Sometimes power comes from neighborhoods that are neglected for decades, but pushed on anyways. Thank you.